Hello YouTube, this is Sam Gerrans from Quranic.com. Today is Tuesday 14th of February 2017, and today the subject really is the way the traditionalist doesn't understand the Qur'an in a couple of cases, and I'm going to look at two particular cases which really demonstrate my main points, or some of my main points, against the traditionalists' methodology. If you're not from an Islamic quote-unquote background, you may not know, but although the traditionalists' presentation would have you believe that this thing that he calls Islam is based primarily on the Qur'an and then to lesser degrees on other sources or literature, that's demonstrably not the case, because quite frankly, the Qur'an is not only not the foundation of this religion, it's not even the wallpaper. You could remove the Qur'an entirely and the infrastructure would remain, which really just proves my point. And what I'm going to do is give just two cases where I can both demonstrate how and why the mullahs, or this religion, and it's a mental construct, gets it wrong, and why it's possible to get it right, and what my methodology is, so that you can apply it. It's not something magical, it's just simply a very plain, simple methodology which works because the Quran claims to be from God, and it also claims to be consistent. And the problem is that when we start twisting and insinuating our little deviousness from other literatures, is that you corrupt the consistency. If anyone has looked at my work on Salat, you'll see that the claim that the traditionalist has for Salat, brother, how do you pray? If without the Hadith, well, the traditionalist's own value for Salat may not be applied with consistency right across the text. He can't do it. He has to deviate in a few cases to try to make the thing seem to fit. You see, a hand and a glove have a natural correspondence that a foot and the same glove just don't have. No matter how much you push and how much you shove, at the end of the day it won't go. But when something is correct, it will go. Click, 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 click. Everything just lines up. And this is really what the traditionalist doesn't want you to know if you are from an Islamic background. But it isn't rocket science. I mean, you do need to know something to be able to do it. It's good to be able to read the Arabic and to understand the Arabic root system. It's good to have a functioning intellect. That definitely doesn't hurt. But it isn't rocket science. It's not hugely complicated. So I'm just going to take two cases. The first is a subject which is dealt with in the Qur'an, which the traditionalist thinks means inheriting wives, actually inheriting the wife herself. Okay? Not all people think that this is what it means, but it's quite clear to demonstrate what it does mean and why it means what it means. And the second thing we're going to look at is the question which actually all the traditionalists that I look at get wrong, which is about the idea of swearing oneself off one's wife by claiming that she's like the back of one's mother. If you don't know this stuff, it sounds bizarre, and it sounds bizarre even if you do know it. But thankfully, since it's nonsense, we can quite simply dispatch it and get on with our lives. So the first point is about the idea of inheriting wives. So what I'm going to do is just give you two translations which are wrong, and then give you two translations which are correct, and then explain why the correct ones are correct, because they don't know why. As I say, all I've done is develop quite a simple methodology and applied it, and this is really the DNA, the core engine of my work. Because as an aside, before I get into the main meat of what I want to talk about, fundamentally what the quote-unquote Islamic world does, and it's what most people do, because really most people are lazy, they won't do the work for themselves, they're looking for people to lead them. And the problem is that when you get into that, what you're really doing is it's my mullah has a longer beard than your mullah. That's really what it boils down to fundamentally. And because the mullahs make it all so complicated, it's like NASA, it's like any religion, any type of priesthood. They have to wear the clothes, they have to seem to know the stuff, and the common people just basically choose their boy and they support that. This methodology, I'm not saying it requires no work. It requires work. Anything worth doing requires work. But it's not beyond the capabilities of somebody who's dedicated and wishes to apply themselves. That's all I did. And so here you are, just walk you through these two cases to give you a taster of my work and how I operate across the entire body of the work. This is not the entire methodology, but it's a large part of it. It's called pan-textual analysis. And all it really means is, before accepting weird definitions for particular cases based on extraneous external literature, look at all the other words first and see what they mean, and then see if that meaning fits in that particular case. And guess what? It normally does. This isn't some sort of genius idea. This is perfectly obvious. The problem with this quite simple methodology is that it absolutely undermines the religion of Islam, because it's not in the Qur'an. Not only is it not in the Qur'an, it cannot even by any stretch of the imagination be justified as an appendage to it. And the religious elite, what they want is to control. It doesn't matter where it is, whether it's the Richard Dawkins, which of this new sort of hedonistic atheistic religion, or whether it's the NASA priests, or whether it's the evolution priests, or whatever it is. They have some specialist knowledge that is very complicated, but if you don't believe it, then somehow you're a fool. That's how they play it. Well, the Qur'an says, why do they not consider the Qur'an with care? And we are not to follow that of which we have no knowledge. So these are quite simple cases, and I'll walk you through them. So the first one is to do with what a lot of traditionalists think relates to the inheriting of women. Okay? So the verse that we're looking at is 4:19. Saheeh International reads, "O you who have believed, it is not lawful for you to inherit women by compulsion, and do not make difficulties for them in order to take, open bracket, back, close bracket, part of what you gave them, unless they commit a clear immorality, i.e. adultery, and live with them in kindness. For if you dislike them, perhaps you dislike a thing, and Allah makes therein much good." That's 4:19. Now I'll give you Pictal's translation of the same verse. "O you who believe, it is not lawful for you forcibly to inherit the women, parenthesis, of your deceased kinsmen, close parenthesis, nor that ye should put constraint upon them, that you may take away part of that which ye have given them, unless they be guilty of flagrant lewdness. But consort with them in kindness, for if you hate them, it may be that ye hate a thing wherein Allah has placed much good." So that's Pictal. Now, in both cases, they've translated as actually inherit the person. Okay? And there's a reason for this, because this will all come from the Hadith. Now, I'm going to give you two more translations which are correct. And then we'll look at why they're correct, because it's a bit like maths when you're a child. You know, knowing the correct answer is one thing, but you really have to know why it's correct. Otherwise, it doesn't really benefit you. Just knowing that 2 and 2 are 4 is good, but if you don't know why they're 4, it's not a tool that you can use. You just happen to know the right answer to this particular thing. And this is really, to be perfectly honest, much of what the common Islamic culture's problem is, that they don't think. That is changing, and it's changing within, to be perfectly honest, Christian cultures. So a lot of the people coming in from these, retrograde societies, which were collapsing under the weight of this Islamic nonsense, they've second, third generation in Britain, America, various other countries. Guess what? They're using their brains now, and they're walking away from this Islamic nonsense because they know it is nonsense, and they can distinguish between it and the Qur'an. So I think we're living in very interesting times. So this is a correct, it's the correct translation. It's correct in this one particular point. This is Khalifa. "O you who believe, it is not lawful for you to inherit what the women leave behind against their will." I'm not going to read the whole thing, but that's the key point. In the first two cases, we're talking about inheriting the women themselves. In this case, Khalifa correctly understands that it's inheriting what the he's inserted the word leave behind to complete the sense. He's correct, but he hasn't explained that he knows why, which means that it's no use to us beyond this one particular case, that he happens to be correct. And again, this really confirms my point about, mullah choosing. You either have to choose to believe that Khalifa was right, or whoever it is. But really, the best thing is to be able to do this for yourself. The question isn't really so much who is right. I personally don't care hugely about it. It is more what's right. And the Qur'an does claim that it is consistent. Now that should be something of a hint if we're finding that we're having to twist and bend in these particular cases to achieve aims and to achieve meanings which derive from external sources. So in this case, Khalifa is correct. Great. Muhammad Assad. So he says, "O you who have attained to faith, it is not lawful for you to, open bracket, try to, close brackets, become heirs to your wives, open bracket, by holding on to them, close bracket, against their will." So he's understood correctly the point, but he doesn't know why it's the point, or at least he doesn't demonstrate why it's the point. I like Assad. Amongst all of the traditionalist translators and commenters, he's the least insane. And some of his work is very nice. However, he is trying to work within the sandstorm of the traditionalists' methodology, which it's like trying to fix your engine in your car by using your feet. It's never going to happen. So Khalifa and Assad are correct. They're correct. It's not about inheriting the woman herself, although there are traditionalists out there who believe that that's what this verse is correcting or dealing with. But we can know how. It's not rocket science. What we do is we look up all the instances of this particular verb and look at all the cases where, like here, it uses a direct object, which it has here, and we see plainly what it means. I'll give you one example, and you check this. This isn't difficult information to find. Go to corpus.quran.com. There's a wonderful utility there that you can look up all the roots in the Qur'an. It takes no time at all. So if we go here at 4:11, it says, "Then if he have not a child, and there inherit from him his parents, for his mother is 1/3, and so on and so forth." So they're not saying that the parents inherit himself. No, of course not. It means that the parents inherit from him. It's the same verb, it's the same usage. So this is the same verb, the same usage, the same object, the same format as we have here. And in fact, the same verb, waratha, operates exactly the same throughout the Quran. You just have to look at all of them. So it's not a complicated process. If you've got, tomato, 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 orangutan, tomato, then it doesn't take a genius to work out that, especially if the value for orangutan comes from something which isn't in the Quran. You just look at all of the tomatoes and think, well, especially if tomato fits the context, which it does here, then clearly tomato is the correct answer. And now we know why. It's not a matter of Sam Gerrans says this, or my favorite mullah says this, or Muhammad Assad says this. It's simply a matter of Quranic consistency. And that's why salat cannot mean what the traditionalist says it does. And that's why the traditionalist in 1,400 years has never really taught people this methodology, because he knows that the second he does it, his game's over. The whole priesthood is finished. This isn't some highly complicated, abstruse, higher mathematical process. And now we have the tools. You can see all of the examples, all of the instances of any verb form in seconds. If you have tomato, 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 and tomato, and tomato, and then suddenly you're being asked to swallow an orangutan, then I think that we should just check our tomatoes first. So this is the way that my translation works. In all cases where I expose, actually, this kind of deviation, I provide full references that you not only can, but should check. So the heart of this is what I call pan-textual analysis. You see, anyone can pluck a single interpretation of a single verse out of the ether, and I'm bombarded with people who that's basically what they want to do all day long and twice on Sundays. But when you ask people to justify their inclinations on a pan-textual basis, then it all goes quiet. I'll just give you my translation of this particular portion. O you who heed warning, it is not lawful for you to inherit from women against their will, and nor shall you put constraint upon them, that you might take away a part of what you gave them, save that they commit manifest sexual immorality, but live with them according to what is fitting, and if you dislike them, it may be that you dislike a thing, and God makes therein much good. The plain message or purport of the verse in context, prior to a related aside which then feeds back into the main subject, is of right financial dealings with women. You may not compel a wife to leave you her substance when she dies by retaining her purely to inherit from her on her death, or by disallowing her right to make bequests. So in Quranic usage, waratha plus a direct object, as here, means to inherit from, and not to inherit, i.e. someone. And we can prove this. This isn't just an opinion. Again, in this day and age, it's getting very difficult for people to distinguish between opinion and any sort of fact. But the Quranic data, the evidence, the instances where this is the case in the Qur'an can be pointed to and cited as evidence, and that is how I work. So not only are we right, and not only is Assad right, and Khalifa correct in this particular case, but we know why. And it's not because Sam Gerrans says so, it's because the Qur'an says so. And you can point to these particular verses and say, look, waratha, 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 here, it means that tomato, 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 tomato. And here the reason why this, what some people claim to be an orangutan, isn't an orangutan, is because it's another tomato. So we're going to move on to a different case, but really pertaining to a similar kind of bait and switch, which the traditionalist, actually it's his stock in trade. This is the basis of his religion, because without this, the entire priestly class has got nothing to do. You know, they're sitting there sucking up what you think is zakah, or getting paid. What are they going to do with their lives? They can't do anything. They're going to have to go and get real jobs and contribute something real to society, or actually start thinking for a change. That would be, I certainly decided not to wait for that one. I mean, 1400 years is a long enough time, I think, to prove the point that it ain't ever going to happen, guys. So it's up to us. It's up to us. So here's another case, and this will demonstrate perhaps on a broader basis what it is I'm talking about. So this is the so-called process of dhihar. Now, those who don't know what this is supposed to mean, or does mean, actually, according to a definition drawn entirely from the Hadith, you'll soon be illuminated. Now, I'm going to give you all full translators above, all the definitions of which are incorrect, and then give you the real meaning of it and explain why, on the same basis as we've already seen. And again, what I'm doing is I'm applying one of the main methodologies that I use in my hermeneutical process. Because as a little aside here, when I started working with the Qur'an, knowing the Bible very well, coming to the Qur'an, the style and the tenor is very different. The Qur'an is incredibly terse. And it's only when you realize that it's constructed in a particular way, it's got an internal mechanism where things correlate. It's like acrostics. I don't mean acrostics exactly, but I mean it's constructed in such a way that you can verify the meanings of things by using its internal structure. And I don't mean some sort of abstruse mathematical thing. I just mean looking at all the roots of that particular verb or whatever it is. The Qur'an works as a dictionary, because the claim that the traditionalist will make is, brother, well, if you don't have the Hadith, how do you know blah, 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 blah? Well, how do you know it with it? Let's be honest. But leaving that aside, the fact is that the Qur'an claims to be complete. And from my study of it, after all of my time working with the Qur'an and actually doing very little else in the last couple of years, except that I'm absolutely more convinced than I ever was. It's stunning in its complexity, but it's the way that it balances, and you can find these answers. So I'm going to give you another example. It's not a very complicated one, but I think it will give you some sort of insight into my methodology. But I hope give you some way of, if you are from a quote-unquote Islamic background, freeing you from the despotism of the mullahs. We're meant to think. So this is how to do it in this case. So I'm going to give you the context, and the verse that I'm going to give you is it's 58:1, just to give you the beginning of the context. I don't need to give you all 4 translators for this because you'll get it. So it reads, this is Asad. God has indeed heard the words of her who pleads with thee concerning her husband, and complains unto God, and God does hear what you both have to say. Verily, God is all hearing, all seeing. Asad has a note here which says, according to classical commentators, this is a reference of the case of Khawla, whose husband divorced her by pronouncing the arbitrary pre-Islamic oath known as zihar. And what this is, okay, this is me talking now, what this is saying to a wife that she is like the back of your mother, and that this apparently Arabic or Arab convention is what's being talked about here. Now, do we find this in the Qur'an? No. Where does this come from? It all comes from the Hadith. You have to, you see what the traditionalist is doing at all times. He's basically working like a virus, really, to insinuate himself and this other thing, because it's a bait and switch process. If you've come to the Qur'an and you think this is an amazing book, just leaving aside the nutty bits translated by the traditionalist, but just the bits that you can understand that even the traditionalists can't get wrong. And then you go to a mosque thinking, I've got to find somebody who knows about this book. Hell will freeze over before you can find anybody there who will actually discuss the Qur'an on the basis of the Qur'an, because they don't know it. You won't find anybody, I promise you. Do a field trip, go to any mosque, go in there and try to talk about the Qur'an and only the Qur'an, okay? And just keep it fixed on the Qur'an, not, well, the Prophet, ﷺ, he said this and it means whatever. Actually the Qur'an, what the Qur'an actually means. You won't be able to do it, I promise you. Well, if you can do it, let me know, because I'd be very interested to go and see. But you won't be able to do it, believe me. It's impossible. And there is a reason for this. It's because their entire understanding of this book actually originates in a completely different literature. And this is just giving you just one example of this and why this is. So you wouldn't read the Qur'an if you didn't already have a pre-existing knowledge of this particular thing, this function of pronouncing the hard and so on and so forth. No, it comes from a completely different literature. So, and this is from Muhammad Asad, who is, of the traditionalist translators, the most gentle and the most reasonable. Okay, but he hasn't worked out, or didn't work out, that there is a way of solving these questions. Now, he's citing an entirely different literature, one written 100 to 200 years after the time of the revelation. And just to put this into some sort of context, this would be the same as us today writing down stories about the Napoleonic Wars. Okay? That's what it's like. So-and-so told so-and-so told so-and-so. If you even trust, if you even believe that the so-called pedigrees of who told whom are right, which is nonsense, it's utterly unacceptable. It wouldn't be acceptable today. It wouldn't be acceptable in the court of law. It's not acceptable as evidence. It's hearsay. So let's look at these verses. All 4 get them wrong, and then we can work out how to get it right. So, Saheeh International says, those who pronounce zihar among you, open bracket, to separate, close bracket, from their wives, they are not, open bracket, consequently, close bracket, their mothers. Their mothers are none but those who gave birth to them. And indeed, they are saying an objectionable statement and a falsehood. But indeed, Allah is pardoning, forgiving. Now they have a comment here. The saying, as relates to zihar, saying by a husband to a wife, "You are like the back of my mother," meaning unlawful to approach. This was a type of divorce practiced by the Arabs before the prophethood of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There you are. That's your explanation. Is it in the Quran? No. Can you verify this from the Quran? No. Who do you now have to trust? The traditionalist. What literature are you now looking to? The Hadith. Are you not told that the Qur'an is complete? Yes, you are. Are we not told in the Qur'an that if the oceans were ink and the trees pens, they would all be used up before the words of God had finished? Yes, we are told this. Nevertheless, we prefer something else. The verse continues, or the next verse, 58:3. This is Saheeh International. "And those who pronounce dihar from their wives and then wish to go back on what they said, then there must be the freeing of a slave before they touch one another. This is what you are admonished thereby, and Allah is acquainted with what you do." So that's Saheeh International. They're fully on the, this bizarre form of divorce. Okay, next one, Pictal. "Such of you as put away their wives by saying that they are like their mothers," and in brackets, "they are not their mothers. None are their mothers except those who gave them birth. They indeed utter an ill word and a lie, and lo, Allah is forgiving, merciful." So that's Pictal. Khalifa. "Those among you who estrange their wives," open bracket, "by declaring them as forbidden in sex," close brackets, "as their mothers know full well that they are not their mothers. Their mothers are the women who gave birth to them. Indeed, they are committing a blasphemy and a falsehood. God is pardoner, forgiver." So that's Khalifa, and he takes the traditionalist's definition. He hasn't bothered to investigate, and he's on board with this particular extraneous definition. Assad, and again, Muhammad Assad is the most reasonable, the most gentle of the traditionalist translators and commentators that really is accessible to most people today in the English language. And he says, "As for those of you who," open bracket, "henceforth," close bracket, "separate themselves from their wives by saying, 'Thou art as unlawful to me as my mother,' open bracket, "let them bear in mind," close bracket, "that they can never be," open bracket, "as," close brackets, "their mother," etc., etc. So he's taken the whole thing wholesale from this extraneous literature as well, and inserted all of his other points of view. Now, I'm going to read my note to this verse, which also repeats in full at 33:4, where there's a comparable verse. And my note reads, "The traditionalist insists upon a fanciful, highly specialized interpretation here, one which assists him in his broader aim of creating an opening by which he can insinuate himself and his usurping literature into the mind of the reader. In summary, his assertion is that pre-Islamic Arabs would divorce their wives by saying that a wife was like the back of his mother, and that this is the practice which this verb at this juncture references. No support is found for this assertion in the text itself. We're expected simply to take the traditionalist's word for it. If the traditionalist could point to a history of intellectual rigor, honest research, and plain dealing, I might be so tempted. Since he cannot, I choose to verify the evidence for myself. Facts first. The form 3 verb, based on dhahara, objectively and correctly means to assist, to help, to aid, to support. Now, this isn't just some Sam Gerrans interpretation here. The traditionalist himself renders this form 3 verb in just this sense, i.e. that of assist, in all other cases outside of this specific context and its adjunct at 33:4. So what I'm saying is that in all other cases where this verb exists, tomato, 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 it means assist. And the traditionalist himself renders it assist, or some equivalent word. And you can look those up. This is 9:4, 33:26, and 69. So in those cases, it's assist, and that's unequivocal. That's absolutely objectively the case. And part of my methodology is never for ambiguous assertions or ambiguous definitions to overthrow established definitions. Where the established definition exists, it supersedes any other definition in all cases. Okay, So assist is what this word means. Now, allowing the verb its natural meaning, which is that of assisting among your wives, fits the context exactly. The Quranic redress for those who swear off their wives, which is what the traditionalist is claiming here. That's what he's claiming. That's the sense that he's claiming, though by another name. The Quranic redress for that is entirely different and comprehensively treated at 226, which reads, "Those who forswear their wives is a weight of 4 moons, but if they return, God is forgiving, merciful." So what the traditionalist is claiming for this, he's duplicating something which already exists, for which there is already a Quranic judgment. Now, in summary, in order for the traditionalist to support his position, he needs to do 2 things. Firstly, he needs to ignore the fact that the Qur'an already gives a clear judgment in those cases which he is claiming for what we have at 58.2. There's no question but that the traditionalist's understanding of 58.2 duplicates a case for which there is already a judgment. That's at 226, which we just read. And the second problem that he has, and what he has to do in order to support his position here, is he has to claim a specialized meaning for this verb, which he himself already renders differently outside this specific context. We should remember also that the entire motivation for this deceit is the Hadith literature. Had it not existed, or had he simply ignored it, as do I, the traditionalist would have been forced to render the verb here in the same vein as it is rendered elsewhere, as do I, and to apply reason to the text and what he already knows about it, as do I. But he won't do that. He won't do it. Why won't he do it? Because he's not interested in the Qur'an. He's interested in this other literature and in establishing himself as the arbiter of what this whole thing means. Put it in simple terms, he's muddying the waters and then telling you what the water means. Whereas what we have is a methodology for understanding what the water means, but people won't use it. They're trusting this professional priesthood basically to read the entrails of this nonsense. Okay, now to the application of reason. In a context which permits of limited polygamy, a situation is possible in which one wife might not be able to have children while others might be able to have them. In such a case, a man, it may be reasoned, might decide, it is assumed within the Quranic principle of mutual consultation, to assist both the fertile and the infertile wives by allowing the infertile wife to raise a child born to the fertile wife. Thus, the infertile wife might experience something of the joys of motherhood, and the fertile wife, who may already have her hands full with existing children, might get support in the raising of a child. Other comparable scenarios are where the husband has a child from a previous wife, or a wife brings an existing child into a marriage. The point in such scenarios, i.e. in which a man assists among his wives, is that we should remember who the true mother is and not obfuscate that fact. These points granted, it is possible to envisage a case in which a man has allowed a wife to raise a child to whom she is not the natural mother, and that decision has resulted either in regret on the part of the natural mother or in a change of mind on the part of the man. It is surely such a case which is the subject here, i.e. one in which the man had to go back on this arrangement, returning a child to the care of its natural mother, thus depriving the adoptive mother of her charge. Now I'm going to read the segment. All I've done is held to the accepted, objectively correct meaning of this verb outside of the hallucinations which come from Hadith, and I think we'll see that we have solved all of the problems. Firstly, it makes complete sense. Secondly, we're not contradicting something for which we already have a judgment. And thirdly, we're maintaining ourselves within the confines of an objective sense for this verb. Our only loss, if you want to call it that, is the fact that we no longer need the bearded mullah with his vast library of nonsense. Personally, I can live without that. I think it's something if you have to make a decision for yourself. So, my translation of the whole segment is as follows. God has heard the saying of her that disputes with thee concerning her husband and complains to God. And God hears the conversation between you. God is hearing, seeing. Those among you who assist among their wives, they are not their mothers. Their mothers are only those who gave them birth. And they say what is perverse among sayings and of falsehood. And God is forgiving, merciful. And those who assist among their wives then go back on what they have said, the freeing of a slave before they touch each other. That are you exhorted to do, and God is aware of what you do. And whoso has not the wherewithal, a fast of 2 moons consecutively before they touch one another. And whoso is not able, the feeding of 60 needy ones. That is that you might believe in God and his messenger, and those are the limits of God. And for those who spurn guidance while claiming virtue is a painful punishment. Those who work against God and his messenger will be abased, even as those before them were abased. And we have sent down clear proofs. And for those who spurn guidance while claiming virtue is a humiliating punishment. That's 58, 1 through 5. The point is for the man to make reparation and also to be able again to approach his wife that he has deprived of this. It's nothing to do with saying you're like the back of my mother. Look at the verbs, how they're used in the Qur'an. The man is assisting among his wives and now he's had to go back. But you can't just do this to a wife. He has to make right. And that's what this is talking about. Before he has any right of sexual approach to his wife, he has abused his wife. He's robbed her. Maybe he meant it for the best. Who knows what the details are of it. But surely this is what this means. I'll leave it to you to decide. That's all for now. If you're listening on YouTube, you can download my full translation of the Qur'an free using the button in the top right-hand corner, or buy the hardback there at 10% less than on Amazon. I also encourage you to sign up for the Qur'anite Plus newsletter on the site to get occasional micro updates. Check my site at skypetalking.com for lessons and more. Like if you like, comment if you have something constructive to say, and subscribe to get more each week. And use the link in the drop down below to donate if you would like to help me keep doing this. And remember, this life is short. Eternity is long. If you want good trees, plant good seeds.